The stars outside the observation window had always brought Kate Morrison comfort. She had spent 15 years studying them, mapping distant worlds, searching for signs of life beyond the edges of known space. But tonight, those same stars were blocked by the dark shapes of warships. Dozens of them. And they did not belong to Earth. Commander Sam Bradley stood at the center of the command deck, his hands clasped behind his back. He was a tall man with gray at his temples and deep lines around his eyes. 20 years in the military had taught him to stay calm when others panicked. But even he felt the cold weight of fear settling in his chest as he counted the enemy vessels on the display screen. 47 ships. The Virathi had sent 47 ships to surround a research station with no real defenses. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," said Lieutenant Amy Walsh from her station. Her voice was steady, but her fingers trembled slightly as she worked the controls. "It's coming from the lead vessel." "Put it through," Bradley said. The main screen flickered and a face appeared. It was not human. The Virathi were reptilian in appearance, with scales the color of dried blood and eyes like pools of black oil. This one wore ceremonial armor covered in golden symbols, and, when he spoke, his translator device gave his words a cold, mechanical quality. "I am Warlord Kethzan of the Virathi Dominion. You are surrounded. Your weapons are insignificant. Your calls for help will take days to reach your homeworld. You have no options." Bradley said nothing. He simply waited. Kethzan continued, clearly enjoying himself. "I have studied your kind. You are soft, sentimental. You value your individual lives above all else. This makes you easy to control." "What do you want?" Bradley asked, keeping his voice flat. "I want your people, all 200 of them. Your scientists, your researchers, your workers. They will come with me as my guests. In exchange for their safe return, your government will give me 3 star systems in the Outer Rim. They will also pay a tribute of 100 million galactic credits. These terms are not negotiable." Kate Morrison, watching from the back of the room with the other senior researchers, felt her stomach drop. She had heard stories about the Virathi. Everyone had. They had been taking hostages across the galaxy for centuries. They were experts at it. They knew exactly how much fear to create, how much pressure to apply, how long to wait before making examples of their captives, and they almost always got what they wanted. Because everyone paid, everyone negotiated. It was simply how things were done. "You have 1 hour to prepare your people for transfer," Kethzan said. "If you resist, I will destroy your station and everyone on it. If you cooperate, no one needs to die. The choice, as your kind likes to say, is yours." The screen went dark. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the station's life support systems. "Sir," Lieutenant Walsh said quietly, "what do we do?" Bradley turned to face his crew. There were only 30 of them, military personnel assigned to protect the station. The rest were civilians like Dr. Morrison, scientists, engineers, people who had come here to explore the universe, not to become bargaining chips in some warlord's game. "We send a message to Earth," Bradley said. "We tell them exactly what's happening. And then we wait." "Wait for what?" asked Dr. Morrison, stepping forward. "You heard him? He'll kill us all if we don't comply." Bradley looked at her. His expression was hard to read, but there was something in his eyes that surprised her. It wasn't fear. It wasn't resignation. It was something else entirely. "Dr. Morrison," he said, "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She didn't know this man well. He had been running the military side of the station while she focused on her research. They had shared meals a few times, exchanged pleasantries in the corridors. But trust him with her life, with the lives of everyone on board? She looked at the faces around her. The young technicians who had just graduated from university, the older researchers who had families waiting for them back home. All of them were looking at her, waiting to see what she would say. "Yes," she said finally. "I trust you." Bradley nodded. "Good. Everyone return to your quarters. Stay calm. Stay together. I'll update you as soon as I know more." As the civilians filed out of the command deck, Bradley turned back to the window. The Virathi ships hung in the darkness, like vultures waiting for their prey to stop moving. Far across the galaxy, in the headquarters of the Galactic Council, Ambassador Zilvex was reviewing the incoming reports with growing concern. The Thessari diplomat was ancient by his species standards, with silver-blue skin and 6 delicate arms that he used to manipulate multiple data screens simultaneously. "Another Virathi hostage situation," he murmured to his assistant. "This time targeting the humans." "The young species?" his assistant asked. "The ones who joined the council only 40 years ago?" "The same. They have a small research station near the Kepler system. The Virathi are demanding 3-star systems and a substantial tribute in exchange for the safe return of the hostages." "A standard operation, then. The humans will negotiate, the Virathi will reduce their demands slightly, and eventually an agreement will be reached. As always." Zilvex nodded slowly. He had seen this pattern repeat itself thousands of times during his long career. The Virathi were brutal, but they were also predictable. They never killed hostages as long as negotiations were proceeding. It was bad for business. Dead hostages couldn't be sold back to their families. "Contact the human embassy," Zilvex said. "Offer our mediation services. Tell them we have extensive experience in these matters and can help them achieve a favorable outcome." "At once, Ambassador." As his assistant hurried away, Zilvex allowed himself a small sigh. He felt sorry for the humans. They were so new to the galactic community, so naive about how things worked out here in the cold spaces between stars. They would learn, as all species eventually learned, that sometimes you had to swallow your pride and pay the price that was demanded of you. It was simply the way of things. But as the hours passed and Earth's response finally arrived, Zilvex would discover that the humans had not learned this lesson at all. They had, in fact, learned something very different, and the galaxy would never be the same. Ambassador Zilvex had prepared everything. The mediation chamber was ready. The translation systems were calibrated. His staff had compiled detailed profiles on both the Virathi negotiating team and the human diplomatic corps. He had even prepared a list of suggested compromises that both sides might find acceptable. What he had not prepared for was the message that arrived from Earth. It came through on all channels simultaneously, broadcast openly across every galactic frequency. This was unusual. Hostage negotiations were typically conducted in private, away from the public eye. Making them public only increased pressure on both sides and made compromise more difficult. But the humans did not seem interested in compromise. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to President Laura Bennett. She was a woman in her early 60s with short gray hair and sharp blue eyes. She wore a simple dark suit with no decorations or medals. When she spoke, her voice was calm and clear, like someone explaining something obvious to a child who refused to understand. "This message is addressed to Warlord Keth Zan of the Virathi Dominion. I will speak plainly so there can be no misunderstanding." Zilvex leaned forward in his chair, his 6 arms frozen in place. "The people of Earth do not negotiate with those who take innocent lives as leverage. This is not a policy we adopted recently. It is a principle we learned through centuries of painful experience on our own world. We learned that paying ransoms only encourages more kidnappings. We learned that rewarding violence only produces more violence. We learned that some lines must never be crossed, no matter the cost." She paused, and her eyes seemed to look directly through the screen at whoever was watching. You have taken 200 of our citizens hostage. You have demanded tribute and territory in exchange for their safe return. Here is our response. Release our people unharmed within 12 standard hours or face the consequences. There will be no counteroffer. There will be no tribute. There will be no second warning. The choice is yours. The screen went dark. For a long moment, Zilvex could not move. In 10,000 years of recorded history, he had never heard of a species responding to a hostage situation this way. It was madness. It was suicide. The Virathi would kill those 200 people without a second thought, and then they would come for Earth itself. His assistant rushed into the chamber, clearly shaken. Ambassador, the Council is requesting an emergency session. The other delegations are asking questions. They want to know if this is some kind of trick or mistranslation? It is neither, Zilvex said quietly. The humans mean exactly what they said. But that's impossible. No rational species would sacrifice 200 of their own people over a matter of pride. Zilvex rose from his chair and walked to the window. Outside, the lights of the council station glittered against the backdrop of space. Thousands of species, millions of individuals, all of them following the same basic rules of survival. You protected your people, you preserved your resources, you calculated costs and benefits, and made rational decisions based on probable outcomes. The humans, it seemed, used a different calculation entirely. Far away on the bridge of his flagship, Warlord Keth Zahn was laughing. He had received the human transmission along with everyone else, and he found it absolutely delightful. "Did you hear that?" he asked his subordinates. "They refuse to negotiate. They actually refuse." He shook his massive reptilian head in amusement. "These creatures are even more foolish than I thought." "My lord," said his second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Thraz, "perhaps we should take their warning seriously. They did defeat the Krillian raiders last year, and they have been expanding their military presence in this sector. The Krillians were primitives with outdated weapons," Keth Zahn said dismissively. "We are the Virathi Dominion. We have been taking hostages since before these humans learned to make fire. They will break. They always break. And if they don't," Keth Zahn's eyes narrowed, "then we make an example of their people. We kill 10 of them, broadcast the executions across the galaxy, and wait for the humans to come crawling back with a more reasonable attitude." Thraz nodded, but something in his expression suggested he was not entirely convinced. The humans had a reputation for being unpredictable, emotional, willing to take risks that more sensible species would never consider. Back on Kepler Station, Commander Bradley had gathered his military personnel in a secure briefing room. They had all heard the president's message, and they understood what it meant. "There's a fleet coming," Bradley said. "Admiral Cole is leading it personally. They'll be here before the deadline expires." "Sir," said Lieutenant Walsh, "the Virathi have 47 ships. Even if the fleet arrives in time, we'll be outgunned." "Admiral Cole is bringing the 3rd Strike Fleet. That's 18 destroyers, 6 cruisers, and the flagship Defiance. Plus, we'll have surprise on our side." "And if it's not enough?" Bradley looked at her steadily. "Then we die fighting. But I've served with Nathan Cole for 15 years, and I've never seen him lose a battle he was determined to win." In the civilian quarters, Dr. Kate Morrison was sitting with a group of young researchers who looked terrified. They had heard the president's message, too, and unlike the military personnel, they had no training for situations like this. "She's going to get us killed," whispered a young man named Peter, barely out of graduate school. "They're going to kill us all because she wouldn't just pay the ransom." "Maybe," said Kate. "Or maybe she knows something we don't." "Like what?" Kate thought about Commander Bradley's eyes. That strange expression she had seen there, which she now recognized as something she hadn't encountered in a long time. Absolute certainty. Like the fact that we're not alone, she said. Like the fact that someone is coming for us. Peter stared at her. You really believe that? Kate looked out the small window at the Virathi ships surrounding them. Somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between the stars, humanity's response was already on its way. She didn't know if it would arrive in time. She didn't know if it would be enough. But she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that her people had not abandoned her. Yes, she said, I really do. 12 hours was not a long time. It would pass quickly, and when it did, the galaxy would learn whether humanity's defiance was wisdom or madness. The answer, when it came, would shock them all. 11 hours and 53 minutes had passed since the human president's message. Warlord Keth Zahn stood on the command deck of his flagship, watching the time display with growing satisfaction. 7 minutes remained on the deadline the humans had set, and there had been no further communication from Earth. No fleet had arrived. No rescue attempt had been made. The humans had been bluffing. Of course they had been. Prepare the first group of hostages for execution, Keth Zahn ordered. We'll start with 10. Make sure the recording equipment is functioning. I want every species in the galaxy to see what happens to those who defy the Dominion. Yes, my lord, Thraz replied, though his voice carried a hint of unease that Keth Zahn chose to ignore. On Kepler Station, Commander Bradley watched the same time display. His expression was calm, but inside his chest, his heart was pounding. 6 minutes. The fleet should have arrived by now. Had something gone wrong? Had they miscalculated the jump coordinates? Sir, Lieutenant Walsh said suddenly, her voice sharp with alarm. I'm detecting energy signatures at the edge of the system, multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace. Bradley allowed himself a small smile. How many? Walsh's eyes widened as she studied her screen. 18 destroyers, 6 cruisers, 1 heavy battleship. She looked up at him. It's the 3rd strike fleet, sir. They're here. 300,000 kilometers away, Admiral Nathan Cole stood on the bridge of the Defiance and surveyed the enemy formation. The Virathi ships were arranged in a standard defensive pattern around Kepler Station, their weapons pointed outward, their shields at full power. They had not yet detected the human fleet, which had dropped out of hyperspace using a technique that masked their energy signatures for precious seconds. All ships, this is Admiral Cole, he said into the fleet-wide communication channel. You know why we're here. You know what's at stake. Those are our people on that station, and we're going to bring them home. Remember your training, trust your instincts, and show these creatures what happens when they threaten humanity. He turned to Captain Ryan Torres, commander of the Defiance. Open a channel to the Virathi flagship. Give them one last chance. Torres nodded and worked the controls. A moment later, Keth Zahn's face appeared on the screen. The warlord looked confused, then alarmed, as his own sensors finally registered the presence of the human fleet. This is Admiral Nathan Cole of Earth Defense Fleet, Cole said. You are surrounded. Release the hostages and withdraw immediately. You have 60 seconds to comply. Keth Zahn's confusion transformed into rage. You dare threaten me? I have 47 ships. You cannot possibly defeat us. 55 seconds. This is insane. No species sacrifices military advantage for a handful of hostages. You're bluffing. 45 seconds. Keth Zahn turned to his crew. All ships, battle formation. Prepare to engage. 30 seconds. The Virathi fleet began to move, repositioning to face the human ships. Their weapons charged, their targeting systems locked onto the approaching vessels. 20 seconds. Cole watched the countdown with cold patience. He had given them a chance. He had followed the protocols, but he had never expected them to surrender. Species like the Virathi only understood one language, and he was about to speak it fluently. 10 seconds. My lord, Thraz said urgently, perhaps we should consider— Silence, Kethzan roared. We do not retreat from prey. Time's up, Cole said quietly. He turned to Torres. All ships, weapons free, no survivors. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries. The human fleet attacked with a ferocity that the Virathi had never encountered. Human ships did not fight to capture or disable. They fought to destroy. Completely, utterly, without mercy. The first Virathi destroyer exploded 17 seconds into the battle, torn apart by concentrated fire from 3 human vessels that ignored their own damage to press the attack. The second followed 12 seconds later, then the third, then 5 more in rapid succession. Lieutenant Ben Hayes led the Marine assault team that launched from the cruiser Valor. Their target was Kepler Station, where Virathi soldiers still held the hostages. Hayes was 34 years old, a veteran of 3 combat deployments, and he had never been more focused in his life. Remember, he told his team as their boarding pods screamed toward the station, the hostages are the priority. Everything else is secondary. They breached the station's emergency airlock with explosive charges and moved through the corridors in tight formation. The Virathi guards they encountered were prepared for negotiations, not combat. They died quickly. Hayes found Dr. Morrison and the other hostages locked in the main cargo bay, guarded by a dozen Virathi soldiers. The firefight that followed lasted less than 2 minutes. When it was over, all 12 guards were dead, and not a single hostage had been harmed. Dr. Morrison? Hayes asked, lowering his weapon. I'm Lieutenant Ben Hayes, Earth Defense Fleet. We're here to take you home. Kate stared at him, tears streaming down her face. They said no one was coming. They said we were alone. You're never alone, Hayes said simply. Not while there's a single human ship in the sky. Outside, the battle was ending. The Virathi fleet, which had seemed so overwhelming just hours ago, was being systematically annihilated. Ship after ship exploded, their crews dying in the cold darkness of space. Kethzan watched in horror as his forces were reduced to burning wreckage. "Retreat!" he screamed. "All ships, retreat!" But there was no retreat. The human fleet had positioned itself to cut off every escape route. The Virathi ships that tried to flee were hunted down and destroyed. Those that surrendered were ignored, their offers of submission rejected, their ships targeted and eliminated just like all the others. In the end, only Kethzan's flagship remained, its engines crippled, its weapons destroyed, drifting helplessly among the debris of his once mighty fleet. Admiral Cole's face appeared on his screen. Warlord Kethzan, your fleet is gone. Your crew is dead. You will be taken into custody to stand trial for crimes against humanity. Resist, and you will share the fate of your ships. Kethzan slumped in his command chair, unable to comprehend what had just happened. For the first time in his long and brutal career, he had encountered a species that did not play by the rules. A species that valued its principles more than its lives. A species that was willing to pay any price to protect its own. He had called their bluff. It had not been a bluff. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Within hours of the battle's end, every species in the known universe had heard some version of the story. The details varied depending on who was telling it, but the core facts remained the same. The humans had refused to negotiate, they had attacked without hesitation, and they had destroyed an entire Virathi fleet without taking a single prisoner. Ambassador Zilvex sat in his private chambers, surrounded by data screens showing reactions from across the galactic community. The Thesari were demanding an emergency council session. The Corvani were requesting military consultations with the human delegation. The Meldrath, a species so ancient that they rarely bothered to acknowledge younger civilizations, had sent a formal message expressing what their translators called profound interest in human tactical philosophy. And the Vairathi Dominion was in chaos. Reports were flooding in from every corner of their territory. Ships that had been conducting hostage operations were abandoning their missions and returning to home space. Warlords who had been planning new raids were suddenly finding reasons to postpone them. The fear that the Vairathi had cultivated for centuries, the fear that made other species surrender without a fight, was beginning to work against them. Because if the humans could destroy Keth Zan's fleet, what might they do to anyone else who threatened their people? Zilvex's door chimed, and his assistant entered with a nervous expression. "Ambassador, the human delegation has arrived. Ambassador Diane Porter is waiting in the reception hall. Send her in." A moment later, a human woman entered the chamber. She was tall and composed, with dark hair pulled back from her face, and eyes that seemed to notice everything at once. She wore a simple uniform with no decorations, except for a small flag pin on her collar. "Ambassador Zilvex," she said, offering a slight bow. "Thank you for receiving me." "Please sit," Zilvex replied, gesturing to a chair that had been designed for human physiology. "I have many questions, Ambassador Porter. The Council has many questions. What happened at Kepler Station is unlike anything in our recorded history." Porter sat down and folded her hands in her lap. "I'll answer what I can. Then let me begin with the most obvious question. Why? Why risk so much for 200 people? Your fleet suffered damage. Your ships expended resources that will take months to replace. You could have negotiated a settlement and recovered your hostages without any of that cost." Porter was quiet for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. "Ambassador, how many times has your species paid tribute to the Vairathi?" Zilvex hesitated. "That information is not widely discussed. But it's happened. Multiple times, I imagine. And each time, the Vairathi learned that your people could be threatened into compliance. Each payment encouraged them to try again. Each ransom funded their next operation. Over time, the cost of paying has far exceeded what a single military engagement would have required. Perhaps, but each individual payment preserved lives that would otherwise have been lost, and created a system where more lives are threatened every year," Porter said. "We learned this lesson on our own world, Ambassador. For centuries, our nations paid ransoms to pirates and kidnappers. It seemed like the humane choice, the practical choice, but it only made the problem worse. The kidnappings increased. The ransoms grew larger. More people suffered because we were unwilling to accept short-term pain for long-term gain." Zilvex considered this. It was not a perspective he had encountered before. Most species in the galaxy accepted hostage-taking as an unfortunate but unavoidable reality, like meteor strikes or solar flares. The idea that you could change it by simply refusing to participate had never occurred to anyone. "Your approach is effective," he admitted, "but it is also brutal. You gave the Vairathi no opportunity to surrender. You killed every crew member on every ship. Is that not excessive?" Porter's expression did not change. "The Vairathi have been taking hostages for over 1,000 years. They have killed millions of innocent people across dozens of species. They continue their operations because the cost of doing so has always been acceptable. We decided to make the cost unacceptable. We decided to teach them, and everyone else, that threatening human lives is not a profitable business. And if other species view your methods as barbaric, if they fear you as much as they fear the Vairathi, then they should not threaten our people," Porter said simply. "We have no interest in conquest. We have no desire to dominate other species, but we will protect our own. Always. Without exception. Without negotiation." The conversation continued for several hours, covering topics ranging from military doctrine to diplomatic philosophy. By the time Porter left, Zilvex felt like he understood humanity better than he ever had before. They were not crazy, as some species were already suggesting. They were not primitive or irrational. They simply operated according to a different set of principles that prioritized long-term outcomes over short-term comfort. It was, he had to admit, a compelling approach. The following weeks saw a remarkable shift in galactic politics. Species that had been paying tribute to the Virathi for generations began to refuse new demands. Some did so openly, citing the human example. Others did so quietly, hoping to avoid attention while the Dominion was distracted by its losses. The Thesari requested human military advisors to help reorganize their defense forces. The Corvani proposed a trade alliance that would give them access to human weapons technology. Even the isolationist Meldrath opened diplomatic channels that had been closed for centuries, and the Virathi Dominion issued a formal demand for the return of warlord Kethzan. Earth's response was brief. Kethzan will stand trial for his crimes. He will not be released. He will not be exchanged. He will face justice. The Dominion threatened war. Earth responded that they were welcome to try. For 3 tense days, the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if the Virathi would escalate the conflict. They did not. For the first time in their history, the Virathi backed down from a confrontation, not because they lacked the ships or the weapons, but because they finally understood something that every other species in the galaxy was beginning to realize. The humans did not calculate risk the way everyone else did. They did not weigh lives against resources or principles against practicality. When their people were threatened, they responded with overwhelming force and absolute commitment. Negotiating with them was pointless. Threatening them was suicide. It was a lesson the galaxy would not soon forget. 6 months had passed since the battle at Kepler Station, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Virathi Dominion, once the most feared power in the outer territories, had retreated to its core systems and gone quiet. Their hostage operations had ceased entirely. Their warlords, who had once competed with each other to see who could extract the largest tributes, now spent their time strengthening defenses and avoiding attention. The silence was deafening. On Kepler Station, which had been rebuilt and reinforced with new defensive systems, Commander Sam Bradley stood at the same observation window where he had first watched the Virathi fleet surround his people. The stars outside looked the same as they always had, but everything else was different. "Sir," Lieutenant Walsh said, approaching him with a data pad, "the new security grid is fully operational. Admiral Cole sends his compliments and says he's assigning 2 destroyers to permanent patrol duty in this sector." Bradley nodded. "Good. Make sure our people know they're welcome to stay. After what happened, some of them might prefer a transfer." "Actually, sir, we've had more requests to join the station than requests to leave. Apparently, being stationed at the place where humanity drew its line has become something of an honor." Bradley allowed himself a small smile. He had not expected that. He had expected trauma, resignation, a desire to flee to safer territory. Instead, his crew seemed prouder than ever to serve here. The crisis had not broken them. It had forged them into something stronger. In the research wing, Dr. Kate Morrison was back at work. Her hands still trembled sometimes when she thought about those hours of captivity, waiting to see if she would live or die. But she refused to let the fear control her. She had work to do, mysteries to solve, a universe to explore. Lieutenant Hayes had visited her before returning to his unit. He had seemed embarrassed by the attention he was receiving, uncomfortable with being called a hero. "I just did my job," he had told her. "We all did." "No," she had replied. "You did something more than that. You reminded us what it means to be human." He had not known how to respond to that, so he had simply nodded and walked away. But she had seen something in his eyes that stayed with her. Pride, perhaps, or maybe just relief that the people he had been sent to save had been worth saving. Across the galaxy, in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council, Warlord Keth Zon's trial was reaching its conclusion. The proceedings had been broadcast to every inhabited world, every station, every ship with a receiver capable of picking up the signal. Billions of beings had watched as evidence was presented, witnesses testified, and the full scope of the Verathi's crimes was laid bare. Keth Zon had not helped his own case. He had been defiant throughout, insisting that he had done nothing wrong, that hostage-taking was a legitimate practice, that the humans were the real criminals for refusing to play by the rules. His arrogance had only confirmed what many species had long suspected. The Verathi felt no remorse for the suffering they had caused. The verdict, when it came, surprised no one. Guilty on all counts. The sentence: life imprisonment on a remote human penal colony with no possibility of release or exchange. Keth Zon had demanded to know why he could not be ransomed back to his people, as tradition dictated. The human judge had looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Because we do not sell people," she had said, "not even monsters like you." Admiral Nathan Cole gave a rare interview shortly after the verdict was announced. He sat in his office aboard the Defiance, speaking to a journalist who had come all the way from Earth to hear his thoughts. "People keep asking me why we did it," he said. "Why we risked so much for 200 people. Why we didn't just pay the ransom and move on. They don't understand." "What don't they understand?" the journalist asked. Cole was quiet for a moment, staring at the wall behind her. There were no decorations in his office, no medals or trophies, just a single photograph of a woman and 2 children who were waiting for him back home. "Those 200 people trusted us," he said finally. "They went out into the darkness because they believed their species would protect them. They believed we would come for them if anything went wrong. If we had paid that ransom, if we had traded their freedom for resources and territory, we would have proved them wrong. We would have told them and everyone watching that human lives have a price, that our principles can be bought. And they can't?" "No," Cole said firmly. "They can't. We don't leave our people behind. We don't pay for their lives with our dignity. And we don't give monsters a second chance to hurt us. That's who we are. That's who we've always been." The interview was viewed more than any other broadcast in galactic history. Species that had never heard of Earth before were suddenly studying human culture, human history, human military doctrine. They wanted to understand this strange new power that had appeared on the galactic stage and changed the rules of the game overnight. In the council chambers, Ambassador Zilvex was reading a draft of a new advisory that would be transmitted to every spacefaring civilization in known space. He had worked on it for weeks, consulting with human diplomats and military experts to ensure the language was accurate. The final version was simple and direct. Warning: human beings do not negotiate with hostage takers. Human beings do not pay ransoms. Human beings do not accept threats against their citizens. Any entity that takes human hostages should expect a military response with no warning, no negotiation, and no survivors. This policy applies regardless of the number of hostages, the demands made, or the strength of the opposing force. Hostage-taking operations against human targets are not recommended. Historical survival rate for perpetrators: 0%. Zilvex read the words one more time, then approved the transmission with a press of his hand. The advisory would reach every corner of the galaxy within hours. Every species would read it. Every warlord, every pirate, every opportunist who had ever considered taking human hostages would understand exactly what they were risking. He thought about his conversation with Ambassador Porter months ago when he had questioned whether the human approach was too brutal, too uncompromising. He had wondered if fear was really the answer to the galaxy's problems. Now, watching the Virathi Dominion crumble, watching other hostage-taking operations collapse, watching species that had lived in fear for centuries finally beginning to stand up for themselves, he thought he understood. Fear was not the answer, but sometimes fear was the beginning of an answer. Sometimes you had to show the galaxy that there was another way to live. A harder way. A more dangerous way. But a way that led somewhere better. The humans had shown them that way, and the galaxy, slowly but surely, was beginning to follow. On Kepler Station, Dr. Kate Morrison looked up from her work and gazed out at the stars. Somewhere out there, among those distant lights, other species were reading the advisory. Other civilizations were learning the lesson that humanity had taught. The universe was a little bit safer tonight than it had been 6 months ago. It was not perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was better. And that, she thought, was enough. That was more than enough.